Lisa Sharon Harper is a prolific speaker, a writer, and an activist. She is the author of several books. She earned her master's degree in human rights from Columbia University in New York City and served as Sojourner's Chief Church Engagement Officer. Ms. Harper is the founder and president of FreedomRoad.us, a consulting group dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap in our nation by designing forums and experiences that bring common understanding, common commitment, and common action. Together, let's all welcome Lisa Sharon Harper.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Well, friends, I am incredibly honored to be with you in this room and to be here in Bethlehem again. My last time here was in 2016, and that in itself was a life-changing experience. And so thank you for the honor of coming back, inviting me back. I want to share with you tonight a message that I've given many times, because it's the heart of this message that explains why I engaged in this struggle from October 8th on, this struggle, this theological struggle, this soteriological struggle, this ecumenical struggle, this question of what does it mean to be a Christian in the world today struggle. And the struggle for me is really grounded in the content that comes out of my book, The Very Good Gospel. So when Munther asked me, can you speak about what is it that drove you to engage in that way? The first thing that came to mind were 4 words that changed everything for me. And that's what I want to share with you today. So the first word comes at the end of Genesis 1:23. I mean, it's 1:1, verse 31. And so the verse reads like this. It says, God saw that everything that God had made was good, was very good. And there was morning and there was evening on the 6th day. And so here at the end of the 6th day, God looks around and says, this is very good. And I always used to think that basically meant, that's a really good whale that I made over there. And that's a beautiful cloud up in the sky that I just made. But actually, that's not it. When I did a bunch of research on this over the course of 13 years, because I wasn't like a theologian yet, I found by talking with rabbinical scholars, Old Testament scholars, Hebrew scholars, that word, tov me'od, is actually the word for very good. And tob is the word good, and me'od is very, and tob is not actually located inside of the thing. In the mindset of the Hebrews, they would not have put goodness inside of the thing. That was a Greek project. When we think of perfection, as in the perfectly level floor, the perfect podium, the perfect person, this was a project of the Greeks. The Hebrews located goodness between things. And my friends, that makes all of the difference. Because it's then about ethics. What God declares perfect is actually then about how we relate to each other. It's not about just being perfect. In fact, that was never, according to the way that the Hebrews would have understood this text, it was never the point. So what God was saying when God looked around at the end of the 6th day was, the relationship between God and humanity is tov me'od. And by the way, that word me'od it's overwhelming, it's forceful, it's abundant, it's crazy, crazy, crazy good. So the relationship between men and women and all the genders is overwhelmingly good. And the relationship between humanity and the rest of creation was forcefully good. And the relationship between all of creation and the way that things work, the systems that govern us, was forcefully good. all worked to bless all on the first page of the Bible. Now, when you turn back in the text, a little earlier in that same day, on that sixth day, you have the next word. Next slide. Salem. And this comes in the context of Genesis 1:26. So if you have your Bibles, you can read along with me. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. We'll keep it there for now. We're going to this word image. That's the word for Salem, or Salem is the word for image. That word Salem is the Hebrew version of the Greek word that we know, which is the word icon, which was mentioned earlier. And that word Salem is, it means representative figure. But it's a revolutionary use of the word in this context, because in this context, we're talking about, there are a couple of different theories about who wrote this text. Some people believe Moses wrote the text, Genesis, all of Genesis, and others believe that this particular text in Genesis 1 was written by a company of priests that were exiting Babylon, 70 years of enslavement, and they were taken away from the land that they called their own and made to be enslaved to the Babylonians in a land that was not their own. And it's on their way out of Babylon, out of captivity, that they then stop and say, I think we need to actually write our own creation story down, because we've been soaking in the creation story of the empire a little too long. We've begun to believe what the empire tells us about ourselves, and the empire was telling them about themselves, that they were created to be enslaved. Because that's what the Babylonians believed. Their worldview said that humans were created to be enslaved to the gods. So how much more would these people who are our slaves be created to be enslaved to us? So the Hebrews, these Hebrew priests, they stop and they write down this creation story, which is actually an epic Hebrew poem. And we know it's poetry because Tob, that word Tob, is usually only used in the context of epic Hebrew poetry. And so they use this word Salem. Let us make humankind in our image and in our likeness. Never before in the history of history had any civilization up to that point placed the image of God in all humanity. At this point, this is a break. At this point, they break from the norm, which is that the image of God is placed inside of the kings and the queens. But here they say, no. All humanity. My taxi driver is made in the image of God. The garbage collector is made in the image of God. The mother who needs food for their children is made in the image of God. Netanyahu is made in the image of God. Every single one of us is made in the image of God. And that is revolutionary. Because these priests, they could have snatched power at exactly the moment. You see, they were about to enter into their own rule in the temple. They were about to cross over and actually be the ones who led the people. And they could have done what everybody had done before them. And God said, let us make these priests into the image of God. And none of us would have been the wiser. But they don't. Instead, what they do is they cast power out for all. They democratize power. Now, next slide. This next word is Rada, the third word. Now, Rada is a word that has been sorely misunderstood. It's the word dominion in the text, let them have dominion. Now, some people have said it means to dominate, even unto obliteration. But it doesn't mean that. I did a word study of this word in the text, and there are 8 different ways to say dominion, or forms of the word dominion in Genesis. And this is one that literally means to tread down. So I can kind of see where you would get it twisted, right? But it's in the context of the untamed wilderness, where vegetation and everything is growing up all over the place. And so it's really a picture of hemming in, of maintaining the boundaries, of maintaining the wellness of the overwhelmingly good relationships that God just declared to be very good. And there's an even better picture of Rada that we get in Genesis 2. In Genesis 2, we see God take the human and place the human in the middle of the garden and say, till and keep it. Now, do you know what those words, till and keep, mean? This is a picture of Rada. This is a picture of what it looks like to exercise dominion. And do you know what tilling and keeping mean in Genesis 2? When you translate them directly from the Hebrew, they mean serve and protect. So what does it look like to exercise dominion? It doesn't look like domination. It does not look like obliteration. It looks like serving. It looks like protecting. And so we have these 3 words, and there are implications to these words. Next slide. The first implication is that very goodness is about the radical wellness of all the relationships in creation. The next implication, next slide, is that to be human is to be made in the image of God. Can we agree on that? Can we agree? If you are human, then you are made in the image of God. Now, next implication, next slide, is that if you are made in the image of God, then you are created with the divine call and capacity to exercise dominion in the world, to exercise stewardship of the world, to exercise Rada, to exercise agency, to make choices that impact the world. That, in fact, is what it means to be human. These words are spoken all in the same breath. There is not anything between them. To be human is to be made with Rada. To have Rada is to be able to exercise agency. Now, next slide. The thing is that we have created a world where only some have been seen to be created to exercise Rada. Only some have been seen or understood to be fully human. This comes to us straight from the Greeks, from Plato, from Aristotle, from their dualism, from Aristotle's human hierarchy, when he calls the barbarians savages. When he says, he wrote in his book on politics was Plato. In his book, he talked about if you were captured, if you were subjugated, you have proven yourself to be created to be enslaved. That's the words of Aristotle. And then we have, of course, the Pope Nicholas V, who gave the go-ahead to go and claim the world if the explorers came across land that was not Christianized, was not civilized, because that was obviously then a marker that they were created to be enslaved. They were created to be ruled. So, what if? I'm just going to do this when I want you to do the next slide, okay? What if, when we govern in a way that crushes or excludes or twists or maims or exploits or cordons off the image of God on earth? What if when we do that, we are actually excluding, crushing, erasing, twisting the image of God through the blocking of dominion on earth, the blocking of the image of God from being able to exercise dominion on earth. What if when we do that, when we govern in ways that hinder the ability of the image of God to exercise dominion, we are actually hindering God on earth? You see, the ancients, they understood the image of the king to be a marker not only of where God rules, but also an indication of the health of that kingdom. Where there were crushed images of the king, where there were toppled images of the Pharaoh, where there were obliterated images, you knew there was war against that kingdom happening in the land. So what if, when we crush or exclude or twist or cover over or erase the image of God in humanity, what if God sees that as a wage of war against God? My friends, when will we lay down our arms against God? When will we govern in a way that preserves the image of God on earth? When will we learn to govern in ways that are not dependent on separation, but rather on connection, the radical connection that we were created for? When will we learn to face the history of what we have done? When will we tell the truth about that history? When will we repair what our politics has broken in the world? And what does it look like? What does it look like? What will it require of us? Baptism. That is what it requires. You see, in Galatians 3:27-29, Paul tells us, when he writes what becomes the first baptismal liturgy, he says, if you have been baptized into Christ, you have been made anew. There is no longer slave or Greek. There is no longer male or female. There is no longer slave or free. Now, there are two ways for you to read this text, at least. One is a very common way, that when you come into Christ, then you are made equal. Then you are human. Then there is no slave or free because you are now in Christ. In other words, you have accepted Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. And so because you have Jesus living in your heart, now you are equal. That's one way. The other way is to understand that when you go under the water, before you go under the water, you have eyes that were taught to see each other through the lenses of empire, through the lenses of human hierarchy, through the lens of Plato and Aristotle, through the lens of the Romans, through the lens of the Americans, through the lens of the Brits, through the lens of the empires, the pharaohs, the empires of this earth. But when you go under the water and you come up, you see only the image of God. And what you see when you see that image is you see the call and the capacity of all humanity to exercise Rada in the world. Now, if I were to have my own meeting with Netanyahu, what I would say is I would share with him this fourth word. It is the word demuth. It's his Hebrew word. He should know this word. It means likeness. And this word likeness is not actually, a lot of people have a lot of theories about what this means, but it's actually not saying that we are like God, like as in we are God-like or we are God. No, 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 no. It's actually a distinguishing word. It is that we are like God, but we are not God. And I believe that the principal sin of empire, of whiteness, not white people, but whiteness as a power, has been that it has been at war with God for supremacy. Empires are at war with God for supremacy. Hence, 35,000 images of God erased. So what would I say to Bisan, the journalist, if I got to sit down and talk with her, even one time, who has been my daily bread? I would say, Bisan, you are beautiful because you are made in the image of God, and you have been standing full in that image, even as you have been under assault. And I would say to the IDF soldier who is hunting her down, you do not have to be at war with God. The good news for you is that you can lay down your arms. You can join the circle of the rest of creation. You can come down off of the scaffolding that you have created for yourself in this wall and in occupation and in laws that have excluded Palestinian people from political rights and national rights since 1948. You can come down from that. You do not need to be a majority in order to be safe. You need God to be safe. You need to honor the image of God to be safe. That, my friends, is what I would say. And next slide. You can find more of this if you want to go deeper, because I have no more time left, I'm sure. You can go deeper in my book, The Very Good Gospel, and this is carried forward, telling my own family story in my last book, Fortune, how race broke my family and the world, and how to repair it all. God bless you.